What's up guys, and welcome back to another eBay miniature rescue. Last week I put up a community post asking for a little bit of help in picking a color scheme for this abhorrent Ghoul King. And I gotta say, you guys came out in some serious strong force and put up some awesome suggestions. So I will be taking on this suggestion right here and painting up this Ghoul King from Age of Sigmar. So I've had this model laying around for a couple of months now. I paid $5 for it on eBay, and I think the shipping might have been $2 or something, so not a bad price overall. And I wanted to do something a little bit different than I normally would with a model like this, and that's why I asked for suggestions. So the most recommended suggestion on how to actually paint this model was to see what he would look like coming out of camouflage jumping off of this rock. The way that I wanted to approach this was to make it look like he had been out, say, in the wilderness, hunting people for days or, weeks. So he's just covered in dirt and grime, and he's bloody, and he's just hopping in and out of camouflage in order to achieve that. So the first thing I did was prime this model using Badger's Steno-Res Black Primer, and then I came in with a white zenithal just to kind of catch the raised details so I could kind of see what I was doing. And then I came back in with this Vallejo white, and I started to do some pre-highlighting before any of that color went on, so that we could kind of get some of this detail to pop. Now the idea behind doing this before you put paint on is that you kind of have a color value. You've got all the way down to black, and you've got your, midtones and your highlights already all over the model. And that way when you start putting paint on, you go over pretty lightly and kind of glaze that stuff on, whether that's, with a paintbrush or through the airbrush. And it picks up all of those details and gives you those highlights and shadows kind of really quick compared to just, going in and layering repeatedly. The next thing I wanted to do was put in a little bit of texture using Agrellan Earth. This is the technical paint from Games Workshop that once it's dry leaves a whole bunch of cracks. So the thicker it goes on, the bigger those cracks are. I'm going to leave that to dry for a little bit, and our first real color is going to be Vallejo's Dead Flesh. Now I really wanted to put a lot of green into his skin, kind of give it that sickly undead look. We're going to come back with some brighter colors to kind of make that a little more pale and desaturated. And that way he just looks kind of undead and vampire-y. I'm also going to be introducing quite a bit of red. So having this green, especially in a lot of the skin, is going to give a nice contrast. Using some Vallejo white gray through the airbrush, I'm going to kind of reintroduce some of that zenithal by just lightly going over from the top down and just picking up those raised edges. And this is just going to redefine our roadmap for some of the highlights that we're going to end up doing later on. If you're not a fan of contrast paint in the traditional method, I highly recommend using it through an airbrush. Now most of these colors don't need to be thinned, but they work a lot like inks. They're very pigmented, and they kind of go on a lot like a translucent glaze or ink, and it really gives a nice look to pretty much wherever you put it, and that color is pretty strong the more that you put on. So using this Flesh Tearer's red, I'm going to start to bloody up his hands and then throw a little bit in his mouth. Mixing a few drops of Black Templar into that red, I'm just going to darken down the tips and give it kind of a nice gradient, and more just because this kind of looks cool. You know, the dried blood would be further up his arms technically, but you know, it just looks cool. Bringing back some of this white gray, I'm going to once again kind of reintroduce that roadmap, so to speak. Although this time, because we have that blood on there, I want to do a little bit of mixing to where that, again, it kind of gives a gradient, and I want to desaturate the top of his head a little bit. Now this white gray is pretty white, and so it's going to give that nice pale skin look. It's going to cover up some of that blood just a little bit on his face, so that we can come in later and define a little bit more of those details, and overall just give us kind of an idea of where a lot of these highlights are going to need to go. Now we still have some of this white gray in the airbrush pot, so I'm going to add quite a bit of black to that, and it's not going to be quite fully black, but what we're going to do with that is just give an overall base coat to the entire base, and then all of the camouflage sections on his legs. That's just going to give us a uniform color to pretty much start with. Then coming back in with that white gray, we're going to add a bunch of that to the pot, and that's just going to give us the next step up in our, black to white gradient. And I'm going to go over the base lightly and just kind of give some generalized highlights to each of these areas. And that way we can pick out these details, and hopefully those will still show up after we get done with our next step. So I'm going to come in with some AK Interactive's dust effects. Now this is an enamel wash, and like most washes, it goes into the recesses and gives you a nice color. In this case, it's pretty much a white wash. So the idea is going to be, we're going to put this onto our rocks to give it a dusty look and texture, because when it dries it kind of has that look. But especially on the camouflage on his legs, it really soaks into those recesses and just gives a really cool cracked skin look, like he was rock and now he's not. And like I said earlier, because he's been outside for days or possibly weeks at a time, we're going to liberally coat the rest of the model with AK Interactive's streaking grime. Now, a lot of this is going to come off eventually, but what I really want to do is fill those recesses with this nice brown wash, and then tint a lot of the color and kind of unify everything with this grime look. Then we're going to come in with some odorless mineral spirits, and like I said, we're pretty much going to take most of this off. So I'm just going to start from the top down and start to take away this streaking grime until, I'm pretty satisfied with the way that it looks. And this is something that you can just kind of play around with. You can take as much or as little off as you want and get that kind of desired effect.
As she takes hold of your lips and your tongue, the kiss of kindness is never in anyone's eyes wrong.
Now after that streaking grime and other enamel wash dries, I'm going to start coming back in with some of these base colors, and this is where that roadmap is really going to start to kind of take effect. So starting with dead flesh, I'm going to go over all of those areas that were more highlighted and fairly lightly, not quite a glaze, but pretty watered down paint. I'm just going to layer that onto those highlight points and get brighter and brighter as we get up towards the face. Because we already have a nice coat of that streaking grime on our leather, I'm going to come back in with some Mornfang Brown, which has a little bit of red, kind of orange in it, and that's going to play off of some of those green undertones. And I'm just going to highlight all of the leather on the model. Now I'm going to introduce a little bit of dwarf skin, and this is a nice, just kind of skin tone color, but it's also good for kind of dirtying up and scratching up leather. So I'm going to go over all of this leather and just kind of give little nicks across it and lines, and that kind of gives a little bit of texture. And there's a little bit of back and forth between that Mournfang brown and this, just to kind of get a nice balance. You don't really want to overdo it, so if you go a little too far, then it's easy enough to come back in with that Mournfang brown and just kind of cover some of that up. Then I'm going to use that to highlight a lot of the red that's on this model. Now I wanted to really get in there and just kind of micro texture and stipple along any of those raised edges, and especially in the muscles. I just wanted to give nice kind of blended highlights where that red meets that skin. So there's a little bit of kind of more living tissue that is just poking out of these areas on the arm and pretty much across the whole model. We want to put a little bit of this skin tone in so that it's not entirely just dead flesh. He's still technically alive and he's moving around, so we want to bring in a little bit of that. It just kind of gives that feeling that there's a little bit more going on in the skin. We've got a lot of different color variation, and it just ends up looking a little bit nicer than just going kind of a straight one color and one highlight. Coming in with Vallejo White, I'm going to use this color to kind of just give an exclamation point to all of the highlights that I've done so far. Now I'm not going to do too much in, those red areas, but across the muscle, we'll water this down a little bit and just kind of put a nice line right on the top of each of those muscles. And especially once it's watered down, it's kind of a glaze. It's just going to kind of elevate that just one more step. And that's really what we're looking to do, is just push these highlights a little bit further. I'm also going to use this on those bones that still have a bunch of streaking grime on them, but just kind of going over and layering with this white gives a nice kind of dead bone look. Now the last thing that I want to do for this camouflage is really tie it in using some of this pigment. Now what this is going to do is kind of matte everything down and give it that powdery look. So not only is he, rock becoming a vampire, or, uncamouflaging, but it's going to look like he's part of that piece. So we're just going to kind of coat that and put it on those areas, and it's going to tie all of that stuff together. I also wanted to come in with a little bit more of that Flesh Tears red and kind of stipple on some blood effects and just kind of move the blood around a little bit more so there's some splatter, but a little more controlled than what I usually do running it through an airbrush. You may have noticed that the brushes that I've been using in this video aren't my normal Winsor & Newton Series 7 brushes. And I'm going to get to that, not this video, another video, but I'm just trying to run some brushes kind of through their paces, doing a little bit of testing. All in all, this was a pretty fun challenge. I really enjoy the fact that a lot of you guys, came out, left comments, and upvoted the ones that you liked and that kind of thing. And honestly, I'm just really grateful, because I don't think I would have even thought to do this or just done it ever. So thank you very much, and I hope that you enjoy this as much as I did. So I gotta say, this was a lot of fun this week. Just getting those suggestions in and kind of jumping off to a place that I wouldn't have even thought to start from, and that's really cool. So I'm hopefully going to be trying to do some more of that, because it's a little more fun than just kind of coming up with stuff on my own. Having that interaction a little bit just gives everyone a chance to kind of have something that they maybe want to know how it's done, or at least how I could do it. And it's just it's having a good time. So I'll probably be doing that a little bit more in the future. Thank you for joining me on another eBay miniature rescue. If you like something about this video, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, as it really helps out the channel. once again, I'm Casey, and I will see you in the next video.
The earth will not forgive. We deny what's essential to be home. Lights you against the right through the wells that being raised while the world is sleeping. They are all around you. No matter where you go.
Well, I don't know if you can kind of see these. Let's fix that up a little bit. So I've been using some new brushes. They're not Winsor & Newton, but they are Sable brushes. And I will be talking about that a little bit more in the next few weeks. Kind of not insanely under wraps right now, but there's some stuff that I'm waiting for in order to kind of discuss that a little bit more. So that's pretty cool. Pretty excited to kind of share that with everybody. Right now on my painting table, like I've shown some models in the past, those are some of the things I'll be working on. So if you didn't see last week's at the end of the video, there's a bunch of models in that one. But this week I've got this going on, and it's a Seraphon. Now, this is the one I'm definitely going to be tackling for the next video, and I kind of picked it just because there's been a lot of Lizardmen talk. Some people I know are doing Lizardmen stuff, and I thought, you know, this is the only one that I have, so might as well try it out. So, you know, if you're into Seraphon, then stick around, subscribe. Obviously, you probably already are if you're watching this, but if you haven't, subscribe and check that out in the next video. On another note, I just want to thank everybody that watches this channel and Goobertown Hobbies for checking out our podcast. If you didn't know, Brent from Goobertown Hobbies and myself started a podcast called Paint Bravely. And we have a YouTube channel. It's just youtube.com/paintbravelythepodcast. I'll link it at the end of this video, and it should be one of my recommended channels on the main page of this channel. Pretty sure it is. Hopefully. Yeah, so if you haven't seen that or haven't checked it out, then I would definitely recommend heading over to that YouTube channel and subscribing. You know, it's a pretty small community so far, but we're growing, and it's been really fun so far. And we just want to kind of share that hobby experience that we have with other people and just kind of talk in an unfiltered, I don't know, more laid back manner, if you will. Yeah, so if you haven't seen that, then I recommend it, as I would. Anyways, that's really all I have for this week, guys. So I appreciate each and every one of you for sticking around to the end of the video. It means a lot to me, and I will talk to you next time.